Okay. We all sit? Nope, not yet? Okay. Actually, we do that. Let's make sure. Okay, good. Well, thank you for sticking around and for coming, Leanna. I'm glad everybody is able to be here. I know a lot are traveling at this point in the summer, but as I mentioned at the start of the service, I couldn't help but think yesterday how appropriate this topic is for the season that we're living in the United States. And so I hope this will be productive and applicable in a daily way for all of us. And certainly my goal for every Bible study, but maybe especially for this one in light of recent events. So glad that everybody's here, and welcome to those who are joining us or will join us in the recording as well. We're going to try to record these every week, just so that because we do have so many people traveling, at least one has already reached out to me to ask if we would record this because they listen to the podcast and were so intrigued by it and impressed by it, and they kind of thought, boy, I wish I could be there. So we'll try to do that, and hopefully we all will have a similar experience. If you weren't able to listen to the podcast then at a time, don't worry, we are going to play some important clips as we go along. But I did want to kind of just start today our conversation. Yeah, I think as far as I'm going to be able to get it. Okay. Yeah, sorry. By asking, were some able to listen? Okay, almost half. That's good. For those who were, would someone be willing to start us off by summarizing the story at the beginning where the guest is talking about a car chase? Oh, yes. Anyone? Okay, thank you, Darla. Okay, very good. Thank you. It's a little too long just to listen to it again, so maybe Darla can tell us how the thing starts off.
So it starts off with the guest talking about he had just gotten his driver's license, and he and his friends were on the road going to a theater, and he was known as a fast driver, new driver going fast in the rain. And anyways, one of his friends said, "Oh, you missed the turn. Turn left here. Turn left." And as he turned left, he didn't see another driver coming up on his left. And long story short, he turned around. He didn't hit the other driver, but they both stopped, put on their brakes. The other driver got out of his car. He was in his 20s and went up to the window and told this kid, "I'm going to kill you." And it was very traumatic for him. And he's trying to apologize. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." In any case, turns out that this other driver chased him down the street in his car, and so it was a low car chase. And tell me, how did it end?
They got trapped.
Oh, they got trapped. Yes, they got trapped. And the other driver got out of the car and went up to his window and was still very upset. And he's saying, "You're at fault. I mean, they're both thinking they were taken advantage of, or the other person was the one at fault. And that's this part of the story. And in their own mind, the one kid thought, "It's your fault. You're attacking me." Because the other driver was trying to get in the window and hit this kid. And then the young kid's friend said, "I have a phone." This is like in the day when phones just came out. "And I'm going to call the police." And he says, "You go ahead and call the police because I'm the one that is not, I was wronged." And so basically they each thought they were wrong in their own way.
Excellent. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Darla. That was a great summary. That's exactly what happened. And so it's a very kind of visceral start here to the episode. And as Darla mentioned, it culminates So with that in mind, and thank you, Carla, for just a beautiful summary there. Why don't we listen to one section here together? So the idea is that, especially in an acute situation like this, where you've got a lot of emotion at play, we can psychologically cast our situation as the one that needs to be defended, and this opponent is clearly the one who's in the wrong. So the next sort of main section of the podcast that I want to discuss here for a little while together talks about then how we view our opponents. Like what are we can see ourselves as being in the right. How could this kid, or the driver, just cut me off on a rainy day like that and not expect some sort of having to take responsibility for this? The police are called. Of course, the police are going to cite this punk. And the kid, of course, is thinking, how could this older man chase me down into the back of a parking lot with a friend in the car and try to break in so he can beat me up and profanely, he's using profanity to tell me he's going to kill me, right? But both have a sense of being in the right. And kind of the nature again of this episode is that all of us kind of fall into that. And maybe that characterizes a little bit of our political discourse today, where each side is absolutely convinced that they are in the right. And then it talks about how do they see those opponents. If we're so concerned, so certain that we're in the right, we must think our opponents are complete idiots, right? Or something like that, right? Absolutely. Well, that's what we're going to listen to really quickly. So, Donna, would you play that first bit from 1521 to 1753?
AI. Now on Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Messenger.
The most innovative companies are going further with T-Mobile for Business, like Delta Airlines. Together with T-Mobile for Business, Delta Airlines is putting 5G into the hands of ground staff so they can better assist on-the-go travelers with real-time information, from the Delta Sky Club to the Jet Bridge. This is elevating customer experience. And Tractor Supply trusts 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business to connect over 2,200 stores around the country with 5G business internet. Plus, T-Mobile is powering AI solutions so Tractor Supply team members can match shoppers with the products they need faster. This is enriching customer experience. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
This is Hidden Brain. I'm Shankar Vedanta. At the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, psychologist Kurt Gray studies the science of political polarization. Along with other researchers who study how we think about our political opponents, Kurt finds that we make a series of assumptions and draw a series of conclusions about people who disagree with us politically. These assumptions and conclusions are especially powerful because they happen so swiftly, automatically, and unconsciously that they don't feel like assumptions or conclusions. They feel like facts, self-evident facts. The first of these has to do with what we think is happening inside our opponents' minds, or rather, what we think isn't happening inside our opponents' minds.
We generally think that we, our side, is smart, that we vote in our own self-interest and that we do things that make sense. And we think that we, want policies that are going to help ourselves and the country. But when we think of our opponents, we think of them as being quite stupid. We think of them as not voting in their own self-interest, and we think of them not wanting policies that's going to help them. And so in one study we did in North Carolina, we presented people with a bunch of amendments that were part of an election a few years ago, and we just asked people about those amendments and why someone on the other side might vote differently than they do on those amendments. And so it might ask a progressive participant in North Carolina, why might a conservative person vote yes on these things? And what we found is that people think that people on the other side, they think that they are dumb and they don't appreciate what's best for themselves or their country or the state.
So in other words, we think the other side is filled with sheeple.
Exactly. We think that we are thoughtful and rational and doing the best we can with complex issues. And we also think that those on the other side are not those things at all. They are tricked by the media, they are deceived by some leader, that they are sheeple, and we just think that they're stupid.
So we think our opponents are not very smart, but it's also the case that we feel like we don't like our
Okay, we will listen to Tractor Supply ads. Or T-Mobile or whatever else. But okay, so the idea here again is we dig in a little more deeply. It's not just that we think we're in the right, and part of our thinking is in the right involves, rationalizing why we think we're in the right. Right? I've done the research, or I've taken all the right considerations in, but then that means those other people who disagree with me, well, they just gotta be irrational. They don't think, and they don't really care about what I care, or really what they should care about. So I want to ask, do you think this is, so this is a psychologist, Kurt Gray, that's the guest. He teaches at the University of North Carolina, and he's basing his observations on years of research into specifically political division. And he shared an example of, here's some amendments, you're going to vote on these, you would vote one way. Why do you think someone else would vote differently? And the general consensus of the responses is they're just dumb. So what do you make of that? I mean, somebody tell me what you think. Does this sound true in our political climate? I see a lot of heads nodding yes. I don't know, Joan, what would you?
I have a situation in my own family. I have two sons who think differently politically than I. And normally among friends, I don't feel that much judgment, but with my boys, I do. And what I feel is, where did I fail raising them that they didn't accept my values? Like I say, I don't mind among friends, and I have a brother that's much more critical, I guess, than I, and he has actually ended friendships for that reason. I would never, ever do that. But I do have that guilt that I didn't instill my sons with the right values.
You did, because you instilled truth and honesty and the ability to have your own opinion.
Well, thank you.
Well, let me just summarize what I think what Marta said, a beautiful observation here.
Like they don't think the same as you.
Well, okay, so look, Marge, thank you. I think that's from both perspectives. I mean, you kind of sense that your kids, your own kids, maybe don't think you've kind of thought through this as much as you should have, and you feel of your kids, how did I go wrong? How did I not raise them to think as they should be thinking? And I so much appreciate you sharing that, because that's within our own families. We're experiencing this dynamic, right?
And I still dearly love them.
Yeah. Oh, and I know they dearly love you, but that is kind of the nature of the way this is working, and then maybe even some in our own families are breaking relationships over this, right? Like they're so dumb, I can't tolerate being with them anymore, right? Like our worldviews just are so opposed. I just can't. Does this sound like we're living in?
Well, I was going to say that I too have two sons. At least I have one that thinks that's smart. I have one that I'm questioning his thought processes. But Dorothy and I talk about everything except politics. That was the one thing that we agreed we were so far apart on that we didn't even talk about it. We just made that a decision. She still was wrong, but...
Thank you. She had an ally when Trudy came along. Well, thank you. I mean, dear friends can disagree and maybe wonder, how can my dear friend, who I otherwise think is just so smart and insightful, be so wrong about all these other things? But I do sense, at least implicit in what Linda just said, is the ability still to be friends. And we'll talk more about that as we get toward the end of our conversation today, and I hope that's a way to move forward for us. But were you going to say something, Trudy?
Well,
just, I have two kids, and they are polar opposites of each other, as her two sons are. I have a son and a daughter. And in our family, aside from a little snarkiness every once in a while, it really isn't discussed. But I don't think of people who think differently from me or have a different understanding from me as being dumb at all. I do think of some folks like that as being entrenched for whatever reason, but I'm entrenched. So, it's not for me to judge. I just, and I love Linda.
And I'm not going to change you, and you're not going to change me.
Well, and I think maybe, and I appreciate that, Linda said, you're not going to change you, you're not going to change me, we'll still be friends, we love each other. It is possible, of course, that on this issue or that issue, one side might see more clearly than the other, right? Or might have a more coherent account than other, or at least might have a more productive solution or set of solutions than the other. That's possible. But if our default is to sort of reflex into I'm right, they're wrong, and maybe entrench a bit, then and maybe even beyond that to think they're wrong, and since I know I'm right, there's got to be something wrong with them, right? We don't maybe engage in the conversation to see if one side could be moved to the other, right? We don't, and part of what I want to talk about certainly, and I know that's at the heart of what the podcaster is trying to help in having these guests on, is to encourage moving past these entrenched disagreements where I just can't talk with somebody about these issues to, maybe I could learn something. And so in a moment, we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to hear about what the guest is going to describe as moral complexity, and then move into a discussion of moral humility. But to set that up, I would love it if somebody would read for us the selection from the Gospel of Luke that I asked you all to have a look at as well. It's very short, so we can read it again together today to just sort of remind ourselves what it said. This is Luke 6:37 to 42. I've got a Bible here. If someone's got their own, would someone be willing to read it for us? Marge, thank you. Okay. Starting with Luke 37 to 42, just those two paragraphs there.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Judging others. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, and will be put into your lap. For the measure you give, be the measure you get back. He also told them a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully qualified will be like the teacher. Why do you see a speck in your neighbor's eye, but you do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, friend, let me take that speck out of your eye, and when you yourself do not see the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, you take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye.
Yeah, this is Jesus not pulling any words here. He's not withholding any words. And so I did want to just chat about this for a moment. I actually think the gospel speaks very directly to the kind of environment we're just now describing. Jesus understood a lot about human psychology and the human heart. And when Jesus is diagnosing sinfulness, if you like, if to talk in psychological terms, if you will, Jesus in his context is telling stories and parables and giving teaching about what is this challenge of the human condition or something like that. He talks a lot about this impulse to self-righteousness. This would be, I think, kind of the main concern, or at least at the heart of the concern that he had with the Pharisees and the leaders, the religious leaders in his day. They cannot see. They are so certain that they are standing 100% in lockstep with God. They are incapable of seeing how far out of step they really are, right? So it's not just the psychologists learn that we think others are dumb. We also have an opinion of how they view us, right? And what they found is quite interesting. We tend to exaggerate how much the opposite side, if you will, our opponents hate us. We tend to think that, well, they must think not only we're dumb, but they must think we're just like the spawn of Satan. They must think we're evil, even, right? And so it goes into that a bit because he thinks that even makes it harder for us. Because if what it does is it allows ourselves to almost then take on the victim mentality, right? I alone am right in a sea of people out there that too dumb to get it, and they hate me anyway and won't listen to me. So what's the point, right, of talking? And we all kind of double down and lock into this sort of victim mentality where I don't get it, and I'm going to be the martyr if I share it, and because people hate me. But what they found is actually people don't, if you're on the political left, people tend not to hate necessarily the political right, and vice versa. They do think often that they're dumb, but there isn't this entrenched hatred that we often assume. And that gets to what the podcast guest describes as moral complexity. So let's listen probably to an ad first, and then 21 to, yeah, sorry, maybe. Okay. Well then, talk amongst yourselves. Who do you think will be able to do it?
Been wronged here, and the police will see my side of the story. And the other driver felt righteous too and said, surely the police will see my side of the story. In some ways, when we believe that people will hate us, it gives us license to feel righteous.
Absolutely right. We feel righteous and in the moral right because not only are we hated, but also because we're being harmed, right? There's a villain on the other side. They're attacking us, and that makes us the victim. And when we're feeling victimized, we feel licensed to protect ourselves in any way that we can.
I'm wondering how much of this is about, what psychologists sometimes call, cognitive closure, seeking cognitive simplicity. If I have to say, Kurt wants X, I want Y, what's the middle ground? It's complicated, but if I can just say, Kurt hates me, Kurt is clearly wrong, I'm in the right, in some ways it's cognitively simpler.
Yes, our minds want simplicity, and that's especially true when it comes to morality. And the reason is because if we acknowledge that the moral universe is complicated, then we have to acknowledge that our moral beliefs might sometimes be wrong. And so when I was in that car, right, recognizing that the other driver had a legitimate, a genuine feeling of victimhood meant that I might be the villain, I might be the perpetrator there, and that's a tough pill to swallow.
So there's the idea of moral complexity. And I'm going to read this again, but you just, I think the critical line there. If we have to acknowledge that the moral universe is complicated, then we have to acknowledge that our moral beliefs might sometimes be wrong. Discuss. There are a couple things I want to talk about in that car, but please, how do you receive that? That if the moral universe is complicated, then we have to acknowledge that we can't just have a simple account of things out there and assume that our simple account is always and in every case the right account.
Okay, so we had a discussion while you were back there. Linda and I did. And I did listen to the podcast, and she didn't have a chance to do that. Yeah. But just from the discussion going on, We were coming at it from two different points of view, but we discussed it, and actually, I understood where she was coming from. I was seeing the 16-year-old who was driving fast, shouldn't have been, in the wrong, and that's what he was arguing, and the 20-year-old driver who had been sort of cut off and feeling threatened, but he was in the wrong to be going after the other car. And Linda explained from a different point of view, so I understand, but we talked it through.
Well, that's good.
You want to say? She was talking from an insurance point
I
of view.
I was talking it from an insurance point of view because that's what I do. Yes, and I'm not sure of the ages, who was who.
The 20-year-old was the one in the left lane, and he was the older.
He was the one there already.
Who made the
Yeah,
left turn
okay.
who wanted to.
The 16-year-old, if there had been, yeah,
It was a new driver.
yeah, if there had been a resultant crash, the 16-year-old would have been completely at fault, except that they do take into consideration how fast the guy on the other guy was going too. There can be complementary negligence. They can both be at fault.
Two things can be true at once.
So two things can be at fault. However, since there was no crash, there was no damage, no one was injured, the idea that the second car chased the other guy, followed him, threatened him, he would be considered totally adverse, totally at fault. And liable for any damage to the other kid's car, and the kid shouldn't feel guilty just because somebody chased him down and
Thank you. And thank you for sharing the perspective that we can sometimes come from when we hear a story like this, for instance, and we can apply this more broadly if we just start with a story like this, which is very clear. We can maybe add, if we were all 16 or 15 and about to get our licenses, we might empathize more with the kid, right? Poor young kid, I'm kind of new on the road, and he made a mistake, but we all make mistakes, right, or something like that. Maybe as we get older, and we feel more threatened by all these cars zooming past us all the time, it's like, doggone kids, slow down, that kind of thing. And so our perspectives can change even, right, within the course of our own life on who is right and who is wrong, if you will, in a given situation. So that, I think, is part of what the psychologist is after. The moral universe is a little more complex than we often like to make it. We want to kind of lock down in a simple account that makes me the victim, everybody else up there the villain. But if we're allowing ourselves to have discussions like this, then we can maybe see that there are different perspectives, at least. Now, I want to say that I don't think that necessarily means that we all become what's called moral relativists, that there is no truth, no perspective. Again, I'll keep going back to the reality. I don't want to create false equivalencies. One side on a given issue probably is more right than another side. But there are very, very few issues in my lifetime that come up politically where one side has zero reasonable arguments and the other side has every reasonable argument. In fact, right off the top of my head, I can't think of one. I can think of issues where, in my perspective, one side might have 2 or 3 and the other side's got like 20. But there is always something like that going on, I think, in just about all of the areas of public discourse that we're involved in. And just acknowledging that, if we're just willing at least to acknowledge that much, that there's that much complexity, at least that little bit, then shouldn't that force us to say, well, maybe I'm on the side that's not the most right? If we did, let's just do a quick thought experiment here together in a safe space. Yes, it's being recorded, but it doesn't matter. I don't know. I mean, our friends are going to be the ones watching or something, family. So let's just say if we did it, if we tried it, if we were willing personally to say, okay, in future public discourse, I am going to force myself to think why, without saying because they're dumb, why might an intelligent person, a thoughtful person, someone who is society, their kids, their family, as I am, why might they think so differently about this issue? If we were to do that, just think maybe in your own family, whether it's a son who disagrees with, if I was to just try on their hat for a moment, what would that do you think? How would it make you feel to think about even trying it? I don't know. Yeah, Marge has something, yes.
Did the kid even, the teenager, did he even say he was sorry?
Yeah,
Many
times, actually. In fact, the whole point is that at the very beginning, he was, he realized immediately he was at fault. And in that initial instance where he cut him off. And so he wanted to say, he was rolling down the window, and so the guy was approaching to say, sorry. But he couldn't even get it out before he got started. Just, I don't know, we can kill you for that kind of thing. So, a lot of expectations, sounds like important. Yes. You have something to add? Yes, good. Great. Dawn's coming up from
And then I will sneak back to the AV room. Do you remember the saying, we'll walk a mile in their shoes? You know, and now I'm like, we're not even willing to go like 10 feet, I think. Like, I almost feel like with me sometimes I want to say, okay, hear me out, hear me out, hear me out. And then I have to know that that person, whoever that conversation component I have is going to say, okay, hear me out, hear me out, hear me out. You know, because it's just like, there almost has to be a signal now to like, I don't know what's happened, but it's happened in my lifetime. I see it in my family. I see it with some friends. That there's just it's just an immediate response instead of listening, taking in, thinking, you know. And it's just such a curious thing to me because I grew up with walk a mile in their shoes, walk a mile in their shoes. It's like, okay, what's that perspective like? What does that feel like? Well, I get that. That's a different framework. You know, what's their point of perspective, you know, and it's, you know, but I find myself too going, oh, I have to hear her out because that's what I have to do. So, for him. No, I looked at you, Darla, but that's not. Anyway, here you go. I'm gonna run back to my hole.
Okay. Thank you, Donna. There's I think a rich insight in that too, and that I don't know also either what might be causing all of this in the long run, or in the deep background, but I do sense that I find more oftentimes that people are wanting to be heard, and at a depth and with a need that I didn't used to encounter, I guess, or in earlier stages of life. But that in our time, it's, and I don't know if it's because, maybe part of it is because we're talking past each other, and so nobody ever really feels like we're connecting with somebody in conversation. I speak occasionally, just like into the void, right? And then I hear others speaking into the void. It's just like voices, all speaking in voids and not connecting. And but why I so appreciate that comment is that part of what I think, you know, what Jesus again is after, you know, in this don't judge admonition and take this posture of being humble enough to ask yourself, where are my own shortcomings in this particular situation? That opens space for connection. Maybe connection that we're not finding right now. And that when you can build communities that out of that, they become kind of communities of healing in a world that is closing in on itself and almost collapsing in on itself. And something like that. But Anna, you had your hand up, I think, right? Did you?
Well, I was just going to say, I think a lot of sometimes the conflict is fear, a need of purpose, and then a need to forget about what's actually happening in our life. And so that you don't have to concentrate on those things.
I think that's just, well, not just a perceptive insight, it's a prophetic insight almost in terms of the podcast. That's exactly where that's pretty much exactly the direction that the psychologist is now going to go. They're going to talk about how we tend to think of politics in our country, and for I think some good reason. I'm not disagreeing with what the psychologist has presented here at all, but because I do think that oftentimes we have seen politics be about power and wanting power, and power why don't we, what else, we'll go to that here in just a moment, and I want to do two things here. Go ahead, actually, Linda, you go ahead, I'm going to double check my notes here before I ask them to play something.
You were talking about people wanting to be heard. I think we're being overheard in this day and age.
Okay.
You can't turn on your phone. You can't turn on your television without there being a podcast or someone giving their a very important opinion about whatever's going on, from what kind of dishwashing soap you should use to who should be the president. And they don't give people time to listen and juggle what's being said, because the next guy comes on, oh no, it should, and they're all pundits, they're all experts. Have you ever seen so many experts on any one thing in the world? How can I be an expert? I'd like to be an expert.
Well, sure, expert on many things. But, I don't think we're disagreeing. I think actually you made the point nicely that many people are talking, but maybe not all are listening. And if we're living in a world like that, it does heighten anxiety a bit. And two, so we're going to talk about this particular issue of cultural division for today's Bible study and next week. Then we're going to talk about social media, and especially we're going to focus that on anxiety disorders among youth. And I meant to bring the book, I meant to bring the book we're going to talk about next week, and then the book we're going to talk about in 2 weeks, which, but we'll get to that, don't worry. Because I do think there's a lot of research that supports more or less, what happens when we live in this kind of a world psychologically to all of us, and who becomes the most vulnerable in that kind of a situation. And we're finding, the data seems to me quite abundant that it's youth and especially young girls. We'll get to that in due course. Okay, so, all right, so we've got, I want to just, Dominic, let's try 20, let's go to just minute 25, and let's see what comes up here. I think, I'll tell you when to stop, as I hear what I'm listening for.
That they are upholding democracy because they were led to believe that the election was stolen. And maybe what they're doing isn't democratic, but if they thought that Democrats kind of fired the first shot, they're just retaliating. But in that case, there is a difference between what everyday people think and what political elites are doing. So I think when it comes to the behavior of the many people who went up to the Capitol on January 6th, it's easy to see how their worldview supports the idea that they are standing up for democracy and for freedom. I'm not sure that I would be as sympathetic to some elites who are propagating that idea.
So we've looked at how people think the other side is stupid, the other side is irrational, the other side is anti-democratic. You recently published a study, Kurt, that reported on what Democrats and Republicans in the United States believe about one another when it comes to topics such as murder, child pornography, and embezzlement. Tell me about the study.
Yeah, so that study, I should say, it's not yet published, but it is available online, all the data and the manuscript. And in that study, we wondered how people would view the morality of the other side. And of course, we already know that progressives and conservatives disagree about hot-button issues. So you might think the other side is wrong about abortion, about capital punishment or immigration. But there are many moral issues that seem totally uncontroversial, like murder or embezzlement or, as you say, child pornography. And so the question is, what do people think about those on the other side when it comes to those issues? Would Republicans think Democrats are okay with child pornography or embezzlement or infidelity and so forth? And vice versa. So when we look at the data, we find that, consistent with what we'd been talking about before, people vastly overestimate how much those on the other side see these obvious moral wrongs as acceptable. We show that both Democrats and Republicans think that 15% of the other side view child pornography as acceptable. That's crazy, right? The real answer is basically zero. But we really inflate how much the other side is evil and lacks a basic moral sense.
So I mean, we're in really deep waters here.
So the idea is we don't just often think the other side. We think the other side is stupid. We exaggerate how much they hate us, and then we tend to exaggerate how evil they are. Right? That's kind of the last point of this before we can move to why we do this, and fear is a big part of that. But I wanted to just talk about that for a moment because of the consequence of thinking that way. And before I do that, before I ask about that, I want to ask you, why do you think it is? I mean, we'll get to the psychological reason that the guest is going to point out in a moment. But what else might contribute to a large swath of the American public on both sides of the political aisle thinking so ill of the other? Why would, Democrats think a large number of Republicans and Republicans think a large number of Democrats are fully on board with child pornography or something like that, when statistically we know that the number of those on either side who think that way is basically zero. But what would contribute to that? What would make us think so many people over there are just like they're just soulless? That's just dumb, but they have no.
Because that's what they're being taught.
Say that again. Okay, that's what they're being. Who thinks? Say that again.
I would say that that is what they're being taught, to have a purpose so that they can function at the depth they need them to function.
Okay. So each side is sort of being taught certain things about the other side.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think there's a good insight here. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, I would even go as far as to say it's kind of more the media on both sides cherry picking things that may not even be true, but can be portrayed in a way to convince someone that the other side is dumb or wrong, monstrous, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to kind of pick through that.
Thank you. Excellent. I think you guys are right on here. An important issue that we're living
At the end of his podcast, Kurt Gray makes the statement that the elites and the media want us to hate each other. And I would add to that they also want us to be angry, and in a lot of cases they want us to be victims, and it's amazing how easily we fall into that mold and let them do that to us, because when we're angry they can have some control and they can have some purpose that they can build their power base on. And I thought that was very insightful on his part. He was kind of staying real neutral here. If you ask the elites or the media why they want us to be angry, they would just say, well, you're just a wacko talking like that. But it's a very good way for them to think that they can take care of us.
Yeah, there's a vested interest. That's what he's after there. So you get into political leadership, and we live in a context, and maybe it's always this way, or it's certainly developed this way, where to win an election, it just means you have to defeat the other. And so it has to go along those. So the more that you can do to rally a base over against that base.
You want them angry.
You make them angry, whatever. You gotta get emotionally invested in this, right? Or they won't come out and vote, or they won't participate in a way that ensures we win. And if we don't win, then we use language like, look at these consequences. If we don't win, it's going to be the end of the world. And we'll see how things unfold in the coming days. But so far, the immediate sort of reporting that's been coming out of yesterday's events has been, I think, helpfully in a way, identifying some of this. The conversation got so ratcheted up on both sides. The rhetoric has gotten so that the consequence, like, it's our candidate or the world ends. And there may be some real consequences to that kind of rhetoric that are damaging to us as a society. When I have been talking for a while about the church, the role of the church, the mission of the church, I think what voice in our society is going to consolidate a counter narrative? I mean, if not the church, if the church won't speak up and say we refuse to be penned in to these polar oppositions where my best friends and I can't talk to each other because I'm not faithful maybe to my political commitments because they're idiots, and in fact they might be evil. then I mean, if the church won't stand up and say, no, we refuse to be that people, then I'm not sure who will, honestly. But there will be different voices, but I don't know if it'll be consolidated enough and it'll have enough of an effect to really change much. Anyway, John, I cut you off.
One of the things I appreciate about the church is when I come to church, it challenges my moral humility. It challenges me to be more humble, and it challenges me to live above the circumstances that I'm being told are so terrible, and to let us know. We, I think, as a church, have the least expectations that the next election is going to change anything. Yeah. At the same time, we have the most hope in the future.
That's great. I can add nothing to that. That's yeah, well said. Okay. Well, and I do, so transitioning to the next thing, again, we'll talk a little bit more about our media world and the many voices that are talking all the time and the effect that has on us. I'd love for us to, we'll do as much as we can with that within one Bible study, but we will try to cover some of it because I do think that is a contributing factor. Why would so many people have such a faulty view of their neighbor across the street or across the aisle? Well, because we're constantly conditioned. We're getting messages all the time to that effect with really exaggerated language, and that we do need to be sensitive to that. Where is this message coming from? Who's promoting it? Why are they promoting it? Maybe it's true, but I got to do some real sifting first to find out. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just motivated by some aim at the end, and that's the whole goal. Everything else until we win is sacrificed on the altar of winning. Okay, so just a couple more things here to talk about in the time that we've got left. As I mentioned, the psychologist is going to talk about the psychological underpinnings of why, maybe as John I think nicely put it, why we can be easily sort of manipulated, why we can be so taken with a broader kind of cultural conversation, one direction over against these sheeple over there being pulled in another direction. So we'll see, Dawn, how close we end up being here. We're getting kind of farther and farther off as we go. But let's because of when I listened to it and wrote the times down, the ads were placed differently than when now, because the ads have thrown us off a bit. But let's try minute 39, Dawn. And I'll.
And she was killed and partially eaten by a pack of coyotes.
Okay, it's an odd place to start, but
I'm wondering
I'll explain.
what effect this has on our minds. The fact that in some ways we've had a very long evolutionary history where we are vulnerable and potentially under threat, and a very recent evolutionary history where that threat has receded. What has that done to our minds, Kurt?
Our longstanding vulnerability to predation has really shaped our psychology in our modern world. Even if we don't think about predators today very much, we are still fundamentally concerned with protecting ourselves from threats. And those threats might not be sitting in the forest or in the jungle behind our houses, but we are constantly bombarded with threats today when it comes to politics, when it comes to morality. So we bring forward this long-standing evolutionary feeling of threat into our modern political realm. And this is why we typecast the other side as predators. And I think it's important to recognize this because fundamentally, those folks on the other side who we see as predators also feel like prey. Even the other driver in the parking lot that night, he felt like the victim, like the prey.
Thanks, that's good. So the point he's trying to make here is simply that we humans are part of a species that's been on this earth for a very long time, and it's only in the last couple hundred years, frankly, that we have existed in a form where we have a pretty significant barrier of separation between us and our homes and our towns and our cities and kind of the wild world of nature. So in our towns and our homes and our cities, we have domesticated animals. We have forces of people that protect, that uphold laws. We have others that go out and they put out fires, and we have other, we've created a kind of urbanscape that prevents, wild predators like mountain lions. There are mountain lions in the hills, but occasionally they come down into the city, right? But for the most part, you encounter them only if you build a home out in the hills, something like that. But that's recent. That's like less than 1% of human history. Vast majority of human history has been on a planet where we have lived right among everything, and the wild animals are there. And right before this, he was telling a story of when he was in a previous career, he came face to face with this. He was out kind of in a remote region of somewhere like northern Canada, I think, and then they ended up having to stay overnight because they couldn't get out at the time they thought they were going to be able to, and they had to kind of huddle together overnight in this remote area. And then when they woke up the next day, they saw lynx prints that had been circling them where they had laid. And so there's a bobcat that maybe couldn't kill a human, but could do a lot of damage. An adult human could kill a child, but could do a lot of harm to an adult human. And our ancestors were far more aware of this. They were intuitively aware that we live in a world where we are vulnerable and at threat. But we've kind of sort of secluded ourselves enough from those threats that we don't have that awareness as much, but we haven't necessarily lost the psychology of that vulnerability. So we've transferred it. There are other predators out there that are going to take my life sustenance from me. They may not be doing it with big claws and teeth, but they're doing it anyway. They're going to do it by passing laws that deny me rights, that take away my ability to earn income, or at least compromise it severely. And so we don't just look at political differences as policy differences. We look at them as existential threats to our very life. And I'm a prey against those predators. And there's something happening maybe at the subconscious level there that he says is really our prime political motivation. It's not just a lust for power. There again, I would say that's also that. but he's really focusing on this other issue that's maybe driving a lot of our political discourse today. We're afraid. And so with that in mind, if you, and feel free if you want to push back on that, but if you're willing to allow that, I would just want to, we'll wrap up here in a few minutes, but I would make a second point that as we go through the Gospel of Mark in our sermons on Sundays, I've pointed out on more than one occasion that a major theme of Mark is faith versus fear. This is Jesus on the sea with the disciples, and when he calms the sea, right, he doesn't say, look at the power I've got. He says, why are you so afraid? It's have faith, right? When he heals Jairus' daughter, and the people are saying, don't bother the teacher, she's dead. Don't be afraid, fear not, just believe. He's opposing this, right? Woman, you're bleeding here. And she's terrified, and if I could just touch him, he says, your faith. That's what healed you, your faith. And so I think here again, this is why the church's witness is so important today. We have a choice what kind of world we want to live in. Each one of us every day has a choice. What kind of world will I choose to inhabit? And is it going to be a world where I can't go out the door without fearing that my life is at stake? Or is it a world where I know that there are threats out there? That's been the case for every human that's ever lived on this planet. But I am going to live to the glory of God by faith. I'm going to carry the love of Christ into places that I may not think totally deserve it, and that might even hate me, maybe less than I think they do, but they might. But I'm going to do that because I'm going to commit to that again today. In the evening, I'm going to repent of the ways where I failed, where I got scared, and then tomorrow I'm going to try again, and I'm going to live under the mercy of God to do this as best as I can. And I think if the church just lived that way, largely, in our communities and our areas, it would transform our cultural discourse. It really would bring a lot of healing to this world. Anyway, Liana, you have your hand up there again. No? Oh, okay. All right, sorry. Looked like you did. Anyway, all right. We'll play one more clip, and then we can we'll conclude with that, and then talk if you want after that clip, but otherwise we'll just listen to one more clip. Dawn,
There are no solutions.
50, oh, do you have it queued up? 50, 45-ish? Let's try that and see. 50, okay, let's try that. Let's try 5110. That's good. No, let's...
out that there's no hope in sight, and I think that's understandable because the temperature has been turned up to such a pitch. But you cite a historical example of a moment when people put aside their differences and truly saw the humanity of the other side, and it occurred in 1914 in the First World War. Can you tell us what happened?
It was the first Christmas of the First World War, and the sides were dug in their trenches. They had the barbed wire up, and even though they were supposed to be killing each other, as Christmas approached, they started being kinder to each other, right? They would hear each other singing Christmas carols in the trench over, and might wave at each other, right? Shout some pleasantries, and eventually the situation got so positive that the Germans and the Allies decided to have a soccer game in no man's land where they exchanged gifts. And so this is really an act of defiance against, the generals who wanted them to kill each other. And it was an act of camaraderie and bridging divides that I think is remarkable even today. Their mission was to literally murder each other, and yet they found space to come together and see past their disagreements.
We could stop with that. Thank you. Yeah, German, World War I soldiers ready to kill each other. Yeah, 1914, yes.
There was a movie out in 2005 called Jouix Noël, I can't say it in French,
Okay.
but it was based on this event, and the British Imperial Opera Company sent someone to the front lines,
Wow.
and the singing, and this movie was beautiful.
Yeah, I bet.
To see this happening.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. Yeah, no, it's a true story. It really did, and I mean, not to, I know that I'm sure Kurt Gray doesn't want to set aside the atrocities of World War I, but it may be just a little bit of a light of hope, because what Shankar Vedantam was saying right in the lead up to that piece was that it does seem like we often don't have hope in this, where we're just so locked in and we just can't see a way forward. And so he just offers this as, I don't know if you could be any more entrenched literally than these two armies were in the entrenched warfare of World War I. And if they could just see for a moment a glimpse of a common humanity, maybe there is that possibility yet out there for all of us. Right? And so I thought that'd be a nice way of concluding today's study. Next time, so one of the things, and I think this contributes to part of why we're locked in a bit. I hope that most today who are here or who will be joining us online would probably feel like there's a lot of good insight here. But there's often a next stage to this conversation, and it is, well, okay, grant everything that we've sort of talked about today, if we just put it in a very general term. But when we're too ready to sort of concede something to the opposite side, well, then that's when we invite injustice in the world. We've got to be willing to stand up against injustice and to fight for that. And so that's part of why, again, I do think, too, what contributes to our seeing the other side is almost evil. Well, if I'm on the side of justice, then what side are they on, right? They're unjust, right? We're already into the unrighteousness narrative there. But that is something that has really taken hold, I think, in our popular discourse. And I have a sense, as a pastor and a theologian, that as we have seen a waning participation in the church, in the life of faith, the life of Christian faith, in our country especially, the United States, which historically, although I would not use the language of saying we were founded as a Christian nation, we certainly were founded by those whose faith predominantly was the Christian faith, and the ideals that have animated so much of our history are absolutely Judeo-Christian ideals. And as we have maybe found ourselves less and less committed to those, we talk about them less. We read about them less. That might be what's contributing a little bit to this opposition between a fight for justice and the sort of saving grace of God. Because this is one of the complexities of the gospel, right? That God establishes a just world through saving grace. They're not opposed in God. God does not create a world where you're either just or gracious, right? But as we've become less and less sort of attuned, if you will, to the gospel as a country, maybe we're finding ourselves opposing these more and more. We can have the kind of conversation we've had today about opening up a little bit and being a little more gracious toward those, not seeing them as evil, because maybe they're not. But then what does that do for justice? Are we not going to fight for justice then? Well, that's going to be our conversation next week. We're going to take up stage 2 of this conversation, and we're going to do it, as I mentioned, by we're listening to another podcast that is about a book on Abraham Lincoln and how he dealt with division during the Civil War. So we'll get the link out for that podcast in the next couple of days. I'll invite you to listen as you're able to do so. Otherwise, we'll do just as we did today and try to play clips next week. But since I didn't begin with the word of prayer, if you would let me, I'd love to conclude with the word of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you that as we heard again in our readings today and our time of worship, that you are with us and you go before us in all of the thorny and difficult circumstances we find ourselves in. Help us as we go this week to rest in that knowledge. And Lord, send your Spirit into our hearts, into our minds to teach us the humility, to cultivate in us the humility we need to have to allow us to open our views, to be gracious, maybe with those with whom we disagree. If not to reach agreement, at least, Lord, to practice your sacrificial love and to bear witness to the light of that love and how it can transform our conversations in this world, to make a difference in this world as you call us to do. Forgive us where we'll fail. Help us to find other opportunities than the next time around. Give us new chances to be your people in the days ahead, we pray. We go now in the power of your holy name, strengthened by your word and encouraged by your Spirit. Amen. Thanks for being here. Thank you for participating. I hope we all can be here again next week. Good. I hope so. It's a new format, It's so yeah.